Before being the Deputy Governor of State Bank of Pakistan, she was the President for UBL and had been at senior positions at HPL and other commercial banks as well. Okay. Next is Miss Coye Benson. You don't need any introduction of her again. Then I have Dr. Jake Kendall. Jake is the founder of DFS Labs. Before DFS Labs, he has worked with the World Bank, CGAP, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you. And our final panelist is Dr. Sohail Munir. Dr. Sohail is an advisor for Digital Dubai. Before this, he was the director for Smart City Enablement Services. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sharjeel.
Distinguished panel members and honorable guest, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. I'm really honored to be moderating this discussion with such an accomplished and distinguished panel members here with us. So just to set the context, digital payments and finance has been around. It's a global phenomenon that we all have known for a while. But the beauty as well as the challenge of this space is that it's continuously evolving, and it's pushing the financial industry around the globe to keep pace with it. That is the very reason that we have organized this event today, to have all the the biggest stakeholders and people who can make things move, get them under one roof, and we can have some fruitful discussion on where we are going from here. So RAST has been a huge success, as we know. We have the national payments infrastructure in place. And despite very challenging economic times at the moment, the DFS ecosystem overall also continues to grow. So that's a great sign. The financial inclusion in Pakistan is also improving over the last few years, and we have some very good indicators around the shift for digital payments. Like, for example, in the last 3 to 4 years, we have seen a major increase in POS transactions, mobile wallet usage, internet banking, with all the major banks coming into the game with, best of the best internet banking solutions. So all these numbers growing clearly show us that the appetite is there for digital payments, and people would like to hang on to that if the right offerings are there at the right time. So with that context set, I think I'll like to open up the conversation with Madam Sima here. So, Madam, with all the DFS landscape activated in Pakistan, and with RAST, at a stage where it is right now, the bulk payments use case launched and the P2Pay use case launched, merchant payments is just around the corner. I would request your views on, what does success truly look like from a state bank's lens?
I'm quite honored because you have all subject matter experts, so I'll try and be a bit of a generalist, which I am by background. I'm not a payments person at all. Our payments person is there. But I will talk in more general terms. What does success look like? So I'll be a little bit controversial, and I won't say that RAST is the big success yet. And I think even all of us from the State Bank and even Karandaaz, we need to accept that it's only just started.
Absolutely.
And we don't want to be like some of the examples that Carol showed. And we want to be like Brazil, and we want to maintain momentum, and we need to be maybe better. But there is a long way still to go, and and I'll talk about it a little bit, cash is still king.
It is.
And while cash is king and the informal economy is full of it, we have not succeeded. Mm-hmm. So the governor alluded to our overall aims. RAST or any technology or QR or whatever are great technologies, and we'll have more of them as we go forward. They're not an end in itself. The end that we are looking at are two principal aims. One, which I think the governor talked about. One was financial inclusion, and I will define that a little differently as I speak. And also the reduction of informal cash, right? He also mentioned that we are now working on our 5-year plan strategy, which will be up to 2028. And we're going to do something a little bit different. We always have strategic goals, and we will still have We will now tailor them to the new State Bank Act as well, and there are many areas of that. But there will be two goals, and I should mention, the plan is not closed. It's a work in process. It will go to the board. It will be a consultation, go on. But two things will be there, which relate to payments and this. One will be a goal on inclusive and sustainable access to financial services. So it's inclusive and sustainable. It's beyond bank account, right? We talk about, we may have 60% adult bank accounts. Are they meaningful? I think not, right? So that's something that's going to be part of this strategy. The other is to continue to build an innovative and inclusive digital financial systems ecosystem. And so that's going to be, and I must tell you that the team that's been putting this plan together has actually been led by Sohail Jawad. So it's very important. So it just shows to you how important digital payments and reduction of cash and inclusion will be. And I think for the first time in our strategic plan, we will have measures of success. Those of you that come from commercial backgrounds have those already. But we will actually have them. And we're debating, so I won't mention them, but there will be success as we measure it for the reduction of cash. It may be cash to deposits, it may be to do with GDP, but there will be measures that we will measure ourselves against. And I think Salim Raza Saab will be happy to hear that. We're going to actually have those kinds of measures to measure our own success and that of the sector. And also for inclusion, and I personally believe we will move through this time from inclusion, financial inclusion as an account, to inclusive finance, because that is what is going to actually make the difference. And to what will be the measure of success, that for us will be how we strike this very delicate and difficult balance between four sets of players, right? And I'd like to just mention the first and the most important is the people of Pakistan.
Absolutely.
Right? For us, for the government, and hopefully for all of you. And the people of Pakistan must have something that is widespread, acceptable, adoption by individuals and businesses, big or small. You talked about the tiny business and the big business, and the individual and the illiterate and the literate, and all of them must accept more, except I won't say they will do 100% in 5 years. I would be silly to say that. But they have to accept and use this digital ecosystem. That's going to be the key player and the key stakeholder that we all should work for. So that's one. Yes, P2P. The milestones for RAS that we set for ourselves have been exceeded. Are they big enough? We do 1 million transactions a day now, close to. Is that enough? I don't think so. So we have to do a whole lot more. And I think my role in all of this has not been technical, but it's been to try to push the teams that this is not enough, and that I see as my particular role, because they are the experts. The second one, the stakeholders which are sitting here that we have to look after, is the financial sector. So at the moment, sometimes we have debate, sometimes I don't agree. At the moment, we have a huge debate going on about cards and pricing and MDR and interchange and all of that. But really, we want the financial sector to prosper. It has to be stable, it has to be reliable. But I think what we also have to do, which we will push, is competition and innovation. And I think that is lacking, if I can be a bit blunt about it. So we've tried to bring in the EMIs, the PSPs, fintechs, the digital banks. We made the incumbents quite unhappy by not giving them licenses. There was method to this apparent madness as well. And so we have to make very difficult decisions, but the financial sector as a whole, banks, digital banks, the fintechs, all of them, for us, have to be stable, reliable, but somehow bring in innovation. So that's the second very important stakeholder. And success, again, will be defined if all four, and I will talk of two more, are held in a delicate and workable balance, right? The third, of course, is those not maybe in this room, the government, the Ministry of Finance, the SECP, the telcos, the Pakistan Telecom Authority, the Federal Board of Revenue. So unless the State Bank can play a role in bringing all of these people together on a page, and it's very challenging. We may bring two and one will run out of the room or something, right? But unless we can at least make progress on that, we will not succeed. So that's the other part of it that's very important, and that's the third set. And the last is really, and most importantly, ourselves, the central bank. How are we equipped? How are we internally equipped with people, with systems, with goals, with are we going to be very traditional? Yes, we are. Are we going to be a strict regulator? Yes, we are. But how will we have innovative thinking? How will we attract the right people? So success, as I see it, is to keep the people, the financial sector, our other stakeholders, and ourselves ready, prepared, and in balance, and try to make the right decision. So that's how I see success, really. I think maybe I've given a long answer to a relatively more simple question.
I'm
but
sure.
that's how I see it. And the challenges are there, but we can talk about them later. You have a very great panel, and I should let them talk about it as well.
Thank you very much for that, Madam. I mean, great views here, and the best part, spade a spade, and the key message here is that while we have this great payment system in place, we do not have the liberty to be complacent about it just yet. It's just started, and I think I'll just it's some very prudent observations there, and I think I'll go to Carol on the subject of adoption, because it seems like what Madam is alluding to is that we have to focus and push for the adoption of this payment system in the local market and the local context. So while we have been planning about adoption, and now we are in the execution phase as well, there were 3 or 4 major considerations in our minds. So obviously there's one tool, which is the supervisory intervention, where the regulator itself can make certain moves and changes to enable adoption. Then there's the awareness, all important awareness campaigning. There's the incentives. We have seen them work, and I think we were talking about that yesterday as well, how effective they can be. And last but not the least, further innovation. So Carol, from your experience, what would be your guideline? I mean, from an adoption perspective, do we go in any particular order of these 4 key steps, or what is the key to success for adoption?
Well, I do think that the question of adoption does vary by use case, and I think that the biggest challenge for you is going to be, and I think the focus properly should be on the person to merchant, because that is the opportunity. I think you're on. I don't mean to minimize the need to continue to work on the person to person. That's obviously, but you've got that sort of underway. But I would concentrate on the person to merchant opportunity. And I think that I'm not sure this is going to entirely answer your question. The first job there is to eliminate the barriers by addressing the issue, the combined issue of the QR code, making sure you have that right, making sure you don't go out into the market until it is right, or if you go out into the market, you are ready to retreat and go back if it's wrong. Mm-hmm. So that's really important. And again, I'm just repeating myself, make sure that we get that right. Similarly, it's very important that you get the rules right around the market entry for the person to merchant on the small side, and that you have clarity about what exactly are the rules. What are you asking the banks and the intermediaries to agree to? What are you asking the banks and intermediaries to ask their customers, the merchants, to agree to? That has to be really clear. Everybody has to understand that. Otherwise, confusion hampers adoption. And if you're not clear about it, or the banks aren't clear about it, that's the biggest hindrance to adoption there possibly can be. So I guess the first step is to make sure that that's all cleared up. Then once you feel like you have that underway, I'm sorry that if it sounds like I'm repeating myself, but I actually don't think you don't need that much in the way of incentives if you have those things clearly there. Then you get a little bit of the brand promotion and things like that, and you should be able to see the hockey stick starting to work. I really do believe that.
Okay.
So
just on that, Carol, I would like to ask the next level of question on this. So from an experience perspective of the QR code, because you're putting a lot of weight behind that, and I understand the importance, is there a particular opinion around whether the experience should also be regulated and standardized across the financial institutes, or
yes,
or should it be actually left to the financial institutes to innovate and compete over?
no, it should be as standardized as possible.
Okay.
Totally standardized as possible. You want the whole end user marketplace to be able to explain to each other, this is the way it works.
Okay.
May I interrupt?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm interrupting, but this is what happened in RAST B2B, I think, as you know.
Yeah.
We looked at the apps of all banks, big or small, and we found very much that the user experience was completely different and in many cases highly unfriendly. So unless we can do that for QR, we will also fail. And we sat in a room and called in each bank and actually went through the app, how it did the RAST transfer. It's still not ideal. It's still friction. And I'll still say it, why I say it's still not ideal. I have this story. I have my famous driver story, and then I have my driver's son story, who's also a driver. He uses WhatsApp happily. He uses Google Maps happily. I asked him to download a RAST app and work it. He could not. And he still cannot. If any bank can make him understand it, if we do that again with the QR and the little merchant around the corner, the really tier 4, tier 5, you can call him a tier 1 merchant, tiny merchant, if he doesn't understand it, it's not going to work. And our banks and even the fintechs are not good at it yet.
So I don't understand in any given market what the authority of a regulator is, but I would say that when I said absolutely standardized, I meant the QR code itself has to be absolutely standardized. I would completely agree that, for example, in our market, I would say that, you would say, here is best practices of what the user interface, this is where the QR code should show up on the app. If you have the authority to say it has to be there, then great. Then great. In another market, maybe you don't have the authority to say that. But yes, the more standardized, the better. It's going to work better. Similarly, and if I'm going to go in a little bit of a digression right now, for fraud control, which is not a QR code issue per se right now, or may not be. When I log on to my credit union online banking thing, the first thing I see is a great big splash screen warning me against fraud. Okay, because they're so worried about the authorized transfer scams. Okay, because they're really, really worried about that. And so that's what they're doing. And so that could be an example of a best practices. So here you're really saying you've got to be careful, you've got to be careful, you've got to be careful. So there might be things like that you're also putting in place as best practices. But yeah, the more standardized, the better.
The better.
And if you have the authority to do that, would be great. So we're going to pass it on to Jake?
Yes, I
and
think
do you
I
have
will.
Do you want to give him another question?
No, you can pass it on to Jake. So, well, we have been talking about the payments side of the ecosystem, but I guess the financial services side is equally important because it is, or it has to be, the biggest beneficiary of the payment system. So with that, I will go to Jake because Jake has a vast experience of accelerating fintech around the world. So he has quite a few success stories under his belt. And considering that, I think I would like Jake, you to explain the I would call it the latest trend that you are developing with the platform livelihoods. If you can briefly explain us that concept and how we should be focusing on something similar in the Pakistani landscape. And also, you talk about the criticality of partnerships between the big banks and the fintech, rather than the big banks seeing the fintechs as competitors or someone that they have to acquire. The partnerships seem to have worked in different economies from your success stories. So if you can also touch upon that and share your views, please, on that.
Yeah. So we're firm that I run, DFS Lab, is both investor and researcher and advisor. And in both those roles, we think a lot about what's the lens through which we look at the economy and the payment system and our activities. And one of the ones we find very powerful is digital commerce. And commerce, we think, is a critical lens because Carol was talking about how do we drive adoption earlier. Commerce starts with the why, right? People don't adopt payments. They don't, become financially included for the sake of it. They do it because usually they're trying to conduct commerce of some kind. And within that, and I'll talk more about that later today, but within the commerce frame, a very powerful frame as well, especially from a financial inclusion perspective, is digital livelihoods. Digital livelihoods, just to explain what I mean by that, are a relatively recent phenomenon. 20 years ago, we wouldn't have been talking about them at all. Digital livelihoods are the ways in which people, the average person, average household, make a living online through digital platforms. Yep. And so we break it down into sort of 4 fundamental activities. The one that's probably most widely known and maybe hops to mind right away for you is gig work, right? Yep. I drive an Uber. I do work online for somebody who lives in another country, et cetera. And there's a whole ecosystem of platforms that facilitate gig work. Some people clean houses based on an app on their phone, right? Another actually probably much bigger sector is sales and selling and trade. So there's a huge sector of people in most emerging economies who are doing some form of selling online. And I'll get back into kind of what that looks like. The other 2 sectors are a little bit smaller, especially in developing economies, but important just for completeness. One is renting, so Airbnb, if you have a house online and you're renting it out. Uber drivers are often renters as well, in the sense that they may own a motorcycle or vehicle and they're renting that out. And then the rarest is kind of content creators and influencers, people who basically sell access to eyeballs by attracting people with TikTok dances and things like that. It's a way to make a living, but it's not very common for people to make very much. So through that lens, one thing to kind of think about is the dimensionality of it and kind of some of the fundamental phenomenon we see in it as we've done research around the world looking at this topic, right? So first, it's quite big, and in particular, it's big on the selling side, right? We did a study in Indonesia recently where we found 1 in 5 Indonesian adults, roughly speaking, was doing some form of selling digitally. Now, some of them were on a digital platform, formally, the local version of Amazon or what have you, and they were a formal seller and they had an account and all that kind of thing. A lot of them were doing it over WhatsApp, Facebook, Insta, part-time here and there. So it's a very broad set of activities, but a lot of activity, and it's very, very recent. I think 1 in 5 Indonesians are doing it right now. I think 5 years ago it would have been nearly 0, right? So very interesting and new phenomenon. A huge amount of it's informal, and I'll get to why I think that's very important in the payment system in a second. Some people I've had discussions with or say, well, that's really just a sales channel for a business. And I think it's true, That's one way to look at it. But we actually think the livelihood lens is important in the sense that when we survey people, one of the things we find is that for a small, important, but sort of minority percentage of the population of people who are selling and doing various digital livelihoods, it's their first form of income. So it's not a business that's expanded, they're selling things through their physical storefront and then they're selling things on WhatsApp. This is someone who's started their whole, career essentially, first time they're making money through a digital platform. And often those are women, those are folks with a little bit less education, and it's a way for them to get into creating a business with a very low level of capital and low barriers to entry, because the digital world allows you often, for example, to work from home. That's why it's so important for women, is that they can often work from home where they maybe have other duties, taking care of the household and things like that. And this allows them within that context to create a business, basically. So we think it's important from an inclusion perspective, this lens. Now, once you start with that lens, it's, as I said, it's a very important lens when you start to think about payments and financial inclusion, because it's often the why. So as much as having a digital account, having a bank account or a mobile money account, and the ability to do payments can facilitate you getting onto a platform, facilitate you doing business on digital platform, and it's almost a necessary part of doing that. We see in the data we've collected that people often adopt and join payments systems and get financial inclusion, adopt bank accounts, etc., because they want to get on. So that's actually the driver and the reason why they start to adopt and use payment systems and banking systems and financially include themselves. So it's critical for that part of it as well. It gives people, it's the truest incentive. It's why people actually want finance, right? Mm-hmm. So with that as a background, within our investment practice, we're looking for companies that are facilitating and sort of building the infrastructure to make this happen, right? And capturing some of the value, creating value for the end users of these systems. And a couple of examples from companies that we've invested in, two of them are trying to essentially be the operating system for small-scale sellers on informal platforms. So what that means is, if you think about what it means to be someone who's selling, I don't know, let's say shoes or clothing, through Instagram, through WhatsApp, to groups of friends, through people that you sort of reach through Facebook, it's a relatively informal form of digital commerce in the sense that you're not on a formal marketplace where you've got integrated payments, you've got integrated identity, you've got account management, all that kind of stuff built into the marketplace itself. Instead, you've got to figure all those things out for you, right? But you want to do it in a seamless way. You want to have the same kind of experience that people would have if they were doing it through an Amazon or some of the other sort of formal marketplace platforms. So basically, there's companies now, two of which we've invested in. One's called Bumpa in Nigeria, for example. They've basically created that experience, but that integrates into WhatsApp, Insta, Facebook, and some of the other online platforms where they're doing commerce informally. So they give people an ability to do last mile logistics, delivery, directly from their storage facility. They give people an ability to manage customers with a CRM. They give people an ability to manage their stock and the items that they're selling. They can push order links and payment links through all these other platforms and have that all integrate back into a sort of unified order system. And they can do that all through a simple mobile-based dashboard, right? So for a small-scale seller, it's a lifesaver because it drastically reduces the amount of complexity, the chance that you're going to sell the same thing twice and forget, and then disappoint your customer, your ability to kind of remarket things to your customer, all those kinds of things. So thinking through, and I am getting back to Rast here because I know in payments in Pakistan, I know that a lot of this stuff is happening as well in Pakistan, right? We don't have as much data from my team, but it's a phenomenon we see everywhere. And so thinking through how do we actually enable those kinds of use cases? How do we make it seamless to do payments through a WhatsApp exchange, and seamless to become both a merchant and a P2P user, and a ability to sort of take payments from people as well as pay, because it's a very kind of plastic and fragmented sort of thing where people are both, usually they're often sellers as well as buyers, as well as doing P2P. And so creating that seamlessness, I think, is really where you want to focus. And it's not to say that the payment system itself, or Ross, or the central bank, have to create those features themselves, but work with the market players, the platforms, and the fintechs and others who are doing that to make sure that you have those use cases in mind, would be my.
Thanks for that. Great views, and it sets a lot of things in context for us as Karandaaz as well, because we have been playing a role of an enabler and a catalyst, not only on the infrastructure side, but also on the fintech and the private sector side. So I think we have been enabling and mobilizing a lot of similar startups, I would call them, which are starting to provide these platforms. But I guess there's more to be invested in that space. So that's a good takeaway for Karandaaz and myself personally. So thanks for that. Dr. Sohail, thank you for joining us. And look, you have some great experience in terms of public sector, large-scale public sector transformations from the Middle East region in particular, as I understand. If you can quickly sort of guide us on where is this actually ambition driven from? We have some great sense of ownership as far as the payments infrastructure is concerned, because state bank leadership is fully backing it and owning it. Within Karandaaz, we have great support from our leadership there as well. But generally, from a stakeholders matrix perspective, what do you see the industry players? What is their role typically? The big banks, how much do they have to be forthcoming to make it a success? And also, I would leave you with another point to maybe guide us on, and that's the open banking. It is something which is on our radar now. We are starting to get into that space. I personally think there is a question there. Is this the right time? Are we too late? Or are we actually getting a bit too ambitious at this time? And we should be, first of all, stabilizing the digital payments and then maybe graduate towards that.
Sure. I think those are very important, pertinent questions. First of all, and my first point is there's an elephant in the room, which is CX, user experience, right?
Yep.
Actually, we are in the wrong room, and people my age or as young as me are deciding what the user experience is going to be. Yes. We are in the wrong room, certainly. Look at, for example, currently Rust, the missing element marketing everybody has talked about. What is the user experience? My first experience, so for background, in 2016, I was tasked by the Dubai government and me and my team to basically look at, okay, what's next for Dubai? We had 1,600 odd government services that were digitized or other smart services on a mobile phone. Where do we go from here? And what are the building blocks that are missing? So we went ahead on visited a lot of countries, did a lot of benchmarking. We came up with 3 areas where we were lacking. In our jurisdiction, there was no digital identity at that time. That was one thing that was missing. The other was lack of real-time payments. And the third was inferior geospatial services. So those were our 3 findings which we really wanted to focus on. My first experience with real-time payments was Sweden, Swish. I haven't started at all. And the experience was so delightful. Somebody SMS'd somebody else money. I went out, I was with a street hawker, they had one of these, it was a very interesting street food, I forgot, but whatever it was, that's a material. So I took it and I wanted to pay in cash. The street hawker refused cash, they Swish only. I was like, what? Okay, now what do I do? So my friend who was with my host, he paid, but he told me something very interesting. Sweden has a law now, they have amended the law that by law you can refuse cash. Otherwise you cannot refuse cash in a jurisdiction, right? And that was very interesting. I said, well, this is where the UX has failed. What about the tourist here? Came back, we did a lot of working on this. We lobbied a lot. We realized that as Dubai government, this was not only our jurisdiction, it was a central bank, and we had to, lobby this. So we came up with at least what the requirements are. We wanted to have peer-to-peer payments, which is going to be free. We wanted the settlement to be sub-second. Yes, there has to be a QR code scheme for merchant and especially merchants who are not larger merchants, because in UAE especially it was a big problem for smaller merchants to get onboarded by the schemes, by the card schemes. So these were some of the requirements that we were coming up with. And there was a company who actually had delivered in India with UPI. And by that time, we were not convincing my DG, my boss, or the governor that this is a priority. The very first thing, they came up with a demo. So they brought 2 phones with them from India. And he WhatsApped me money. So he opened up his WhatsApp. And like when you have this, you hit this clip, there is this location sign. With that, there was a rupee sign. He clicked on the rupee sign, he hit 100 rupees, and it went to the next one. I mean, there was nothing more that he had to do than to convince us or my boss or the governor that this is the way to go. I mean, UAE just actually, currently I think there are about 44 or 45 jurisdictions who have implemented faster payments or real-time payments, including Fed finally. UAE actually just launched in Feb this year. So we contracted it last year, and they've gone live supposedly in Feb this year. A few banks have already onboarded, but we haven't started hearing about it yet. So same dilemma that Rast has. So what I'm saying is that it's the experience that is going to matter. In India's case, they went to this 4-party model, the PSI, and then independent apps could actually come and integrate. Initially, I think Google had Google Fori or something like instant, something like that. And there were multiple apps that were there. They had 1 billion subscribers in 5.5 years. But now pretty much everybody is using instant payments. So I think that's the UX is going to be the most important part, number one. Secondly, even in your payment infrastructure, bringing in third parties, opening up to smaller parties to access it and to open up the data, I think that's going to be the most important part. We certainly have one lacking piece in our jurisdiction, which is the digital identity. And, there are many ways of doing it. It could be government-led, but it could also be bank-led. Bank ID in Denmark and Sweden is a great example of this. Banks have put together a consortium. That consortium is actually not only running the digital identity, but also, I believe, the real-time payment platform, if I'm not mistaken. So that's one model to look at. Of course, one size does not fit all. Every jurisdiction has to look at it. The next part in this is, of course, you talked about open banking. Do we have the time for it? Are we too early? I'm sorry, we have even missed the board of open banking. We should not even be talking about open banking. You should talk about open finance now. So it's a whole different ballgame, because it's not only about your payment providers. So when you talk about open finance, you are looking at third-party providers. One of that is which is handling the payments, which is what the central bank would be very interested in. But then there is another part which is the data provider, which is not handling your payment. Now that is the one which is going to revolutionize the whole ecosystem, not the payment providers. They will be holding the data, and if you control it, you are going to lose everything in your jurisdiction, not allowing it. And if you don't control it, then the data provider is going to become much more powerful than the payment provider. So that's something which has to be balanced very properly. In our jurisdiction, we have issues. We have lack of proper personal data protection, which is lacking, limited, whatever it is right now. A data strategy or a data law is something that is missing. So you have these challenges, certainly. But what is important is for the central bank to come up with a framework in this case. And no, I do not agree that it should be a restricted framework. Do not define everything. You cannot. What Sohail and his team has done with the with blockchain and other initiatives, which is sandboxing it. I think that is the best approach. Sandbox it, what SCCP has tried to do also, that is the approach to go forward with, but you have to allow open finance. Otherwise, you'll be left. So, today, I mean, you're all techies here or technical bankers. 10 years, in 2023, when you look back in technology, what is it that people are going to remember 2023 for? In tech. Most of the people who I'm going to ask this question are going to say generative AI. I disagree. This is the era of super apps. What has happened, what is happening right now is super apps are evolving, right? And I see this is the beginning of the era of super apps. We have all seen what WeChat has done in China with their ecosystem. That super app has 9 million mini programs in it. Majority of those 9 million programs are consumers of payment data or payment systems. Now, globally, this is becoming a big phenomenon. UAE at a government level, every bank, every Uber or something else, a super app, what they call themselves, are looking at becoming that super app with payment. Saudi, a similar situation. I'm also advising NEOM and Saudi government. Same thing. Saudi, this is a big thing right now. So at least I can speak for this region. And I'm pretty sure that what happens is in this region is pretty much following, and we are telling what happens in the US or Europe for that matter. Well, in US I have to take it back because of your 40 peg finally story. But basically that's what it is. And super apps would require, so those millennials or Gen Zs or Gen Alphas, what is required is an experience which is going to be very seamless, which is going to allow payments with all of these merchants, some of them not even merchants, individuals, who are providing services on these super apps. And if you don't do that, if you don't enable that, you're going to miss the boat again. I think we are way left behind in the e-commerce board or the mobile commerce side. And this is again going to be a big issue. It's not only about commerce, it's not only about selling stuff, services, offering my services, education, pretty much. These super apps are going to be the one interface to the life, right? Yeah. So it's going to be very important to enable that. That's what I wanted to say.
Excellent views there. So again, a lot of takeaways and some good news, by the way. There is a banking association who are working in the background to build not exactly digital identity, but an eKYC model from what we know. Hopefully it will be soon. So keeping our fingers crossed.
If you allow me just a
Sure,
second.
sure.
The platform that you're talking about, the eKYC blockchain platform, I mean, it's a great initiative that you've done. We tried a few things in Dubai with this. One is the same thing, eKYC platform. Somehow we couldn't take it forward. Bahrain did that very successfully. But now you open the ecosystem to non-banking players, to insurance players and other things, right? Same thing, the same platform or a similar platform could become an artifact exchange for exchange of things between the banks.
Yeah.
Most of your fraud, we were discussing fraud, is going
to
to go away. You have bank guarantee fraud, for example.
Yeah.
Any 3-party, 4-party artifact between the banks, that fraud is going to go away if you're going to use a platform like that for this exchange. And then you have trade finance kind of platforms.
Yes.
UAE has a very successful platform run by Etisalat, which is called UAE Trade Connect. And that's basically bill discount, invoice financing, invoice fraud platform. So instead of me bringing one invoice and trying to get bill discounted for 10 other banks, it comes to the platform. And at this stage, it's only about anti-fraud. But what if tomorrow I let the banks compete, and if I let the banks compete, then might as well let the crowd compete to fund that transaction. Right?
True. Yep. Look, great conversation, and I'm sure I can sit here and ask you all 100 more questions, and we will still be learning. But yes, conscious of time, I would really like to thank each one of you. Madam Sima, it was great to have you on the panel. And Dr. Sohail, thank you very much for your views on how we need to move forward. So I'm again taking away digital identity, digital exchange, or data exchange, I should call it, and UI UX, of course. I hope the industry leaders here do acknowledge and recognize that UI UX is going to be one of the key success factors, no matter how fancy the technology is at the back end. if we cannot create the right experience for end users, it's not going to scale. I would not like to say it's going to fail. It's definitely not going to scale. So let's be cognizant of that and work towards a more digital and inclusive Pakistan. Thank you very much.